It's no wonder people are afraid to talk about planned giving because people think it's about death and taxes, but it's really about relationships. And if you're already good at building donor relationships, then you have the foundation to be good at planned giving.
I'm Rich Frazier.
And I'm Russ Phaneuf.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange, a podcast from IPM Advancement.
We believe strong nonprofits can change the world, and our goal with each episode is to bring you insightful conversations with thought leaders from the nonprofit sector.
Let's dive in. Russ, good to see you.
Rich, it's great to see you. It's fantastic to be back for episode 2 in season 3 of the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange.
And here we are. We've got an exciting topic. We're talking about planned giving today. Oh, by the way, Russ, there's an old saying, when the best time to plant a tree is?
Tell me, Rich.
20 years ago.
Rich, the second best time to plant a tree is now.
It's the same with planned giving. And we've got some experts on our panel today to talk about planned giving. Let's go meet them. Jeannette Edwards, tell us about yourself.
Thanks. I've been with Good Shepherd Rehabilitation Network for the last 14 years as Senior Planned Giving Officer, and I've been in fundraising for 27 years. My early years, before I went into planned giving, were for very small grassroots organizations, and that really has colored my perspective and my approach towards planned giving. So I'm excited to be here today, and thanks for having me.
And we are excited to have you too. Thank you. Matt Hugg.
Yes. Hi, Rich. I right now have a website called nonprofit.courses, which has content on planned giving and a lot of other things for folks in nonprofits. But my background is in charitable gift fundraising, a lot of years with universities doing planned giving and major gift work. And since then, consulting and teaching, including planned giving, particularly to people who have no background or clue about what planned giving is.
Excellent. And thank you for being with us today. And my old friend, Alan Knobloch.
Yes, my name is Alan Knobloch. I am a consultant with IPM, but in my prior life, similar to Matt, I've done a lot of planned gift and major gift fundraising, healthcare, and also in the environmental space. I was a planned giving officer actually on several occasions and a principal gift officer with planned giving responsibilities.
Great. We appreciate your time today. So let's start for the uninitiated. What is planned giving? What do we mean by that?
Well, I like to describe it as gifts such as wills and estates, trusts, things that typically, although not always, occur or are triggered at, we'll say, when somebody's will matures.
I'm going to write that down right now. So what do we typically see as maybe some of the top planned giving resources?
Most bequests are going to be by will or beneficiary designation. And most of the statistics say that 90% of all planned gifts that come in via those two ways, which are really simple and easy to arrange. And I often like to think of planned giving as the great equalizer, because if you have a donor who wants to make a really big impact, but can't do so right now, doesn't want to make a gift that affects their current income, then a planned gift is really a great opportunity for them to make that big impact.
Excellent. Well, as the individual giving guy and the annual fund guy, I think it's wonderful to have a conversation about planned giving today, because we have the biggest transfer of wealth in history happening right now. And that is an opportunity for so many nonprofits to reevaluate how their revenue comes in and maybe get some additional revenue from planned giving. So my question, as the annual fund kind of individual giving person that is outside this world a lot, why is it important that nonprofits have a program, and why is it important that they're actively fundraising for planned gifts as opposed to just letting the gifts roll in?
Actually, Russ, you are not out of the planned giving loop or cycle as an annual fund person.
That's true. That's true. We might be the first point of contact.
Well, not only that, though, but people who make consistent annual gifts are more likely to make a planned gift as opposed to the big money donor who might give once or twice or a handful of times. Jeanette, you probably have more experience in that than a lot of us.
I agree with you completely, Matt. We see planned gifts coming from rank and file donors who give year in and year out. We have statistics, and our bequests are much more likely to come from our regular annual donors who've been giving consecutively every year for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years or more. Or people who have a connection to our organization and may not be giving, but a really strong connection, like family member of a resident, a patient, or a volunteer. So I think it's that longevity and that strong connection that's the greatest predictor of whether someone's going to be a planned gift donor. And income really is not a consideration for determining who your best prospects are.
Interesting.
Like we have this amazing thank you calling campaign that's just uncovered some amazing things in the 13 years we've been doing it. We call rank and file donors. Like if you give $50, but you've been doing it for 30 years consecutively, you're getting a thank you call at least once or twice a year from us.
That's
and
nice.
I know, and I don't know anybody else who's been doing it. And the stuff that we've turned up from that has just been tremendous, including some bequests.
I know a fellow who said everybody has one planned gift in them.
I'd like to provide a yes and. So it's an agree with what I've heard here, but also in my own travels and analysis and databases, I've seen very nice planned gifts come from people who've had one gift that's quite lapsed or a few gifts. And definitely at the American Cancer Society, one of the things they discovered as a major flaw was when donors would give over years and then lapse, they'd pull them out of their system. But that clearly said they've become retired and on fixed income. I guess my point is they can come from anywhere. And in healthcare, I would say at the Phoenix Children's Hospital, 15% of bequests that came in, as well as people in our legacy society, were from known donors. The rest of them were not. So my point really is, and when you say why should nonprofits have a program, I'm quite unapologetic in saying because that's an important source of revenue that you need to know how to address. And if you're afraid of it or not implementing it, you're leaving much money on the table.
Yeah, it seems to me that a lot of folks get hung up on the fact that it might not be immediate revenue, right? You launch the program and there's gonna be a tail to getting that revenue in.
And that sort of becomes a challenge, that lack of immediacy. It can sometimes become a barrier for boards of directors or bosses when it comes to sort of creating that planned giving strategy.
Yeah, I think that's especially true for some small nonprofits. I'd been a development director 3 times at small organizations before I entered planned giving. And we did not have a planned giving program at any of those organizations. I think the smaller the organization is, the more that's true. Boards and managers want to see proof. They want metrics. They want to be able to have goals that you can measure. And that's very difficult to do in planned giving. If you start today, you're looking at, you talk about that tail, you're looking at 5 years, maybe even 10 years before you start seeing bequests come in. So how do you substantiate investing time and resources into a program when it's so very difficult to measure the results?
Yeah, you don't want to hire a planned giving officer who can predict when that will is going to come in.
I would add, the other thing I do a lot with clients is try to take all of the estates that they've had come in and calculate an average bequest for them. And if you extrapolate that over their legacy society, if they have one, or future gifts, that can be substantial enough to take it away from being kind of subjective to very direct. Hey, we have $3 million in the pipeline. Do you want to spend nothing on that, or do you want to address it?
Looking at the demographics of planned giving prospects, what is that kind of sweet spot of age and consistency and that willingness to engage with the organization? What is that sweet spot for you all? If I could just take a quick poll.
That's a great question.
I would say the science that I learned is flag frequency, longevity, age, and gender. So you look at all those factors. My experience, though, has been any one of those has brought good planned giving prospects. I think what we've said is generally true for the majority, but they can come from anywhere.
Forget who it was, either Cancer Society or Heart Association or somebody, but the ad was, "We're happy to be last."
That's the American Cancer Society. We'd be glad to be last in line. Put us in your will and trust and tell us when you do. Yeah, I did that for many years.
Yeah, no, I thought that was brilliant.
It is brilliant.
Great strategy. No, I would say, it's a life cycle thing to when to talk to folks. And it's not, the gut might say, oh, well, get them when they're retired, when they're old. And actually, no, I would say get them before when people feel, whether they are or not poor, we'll say, right, or feel poor, people feel less of means at different times of their lives. And when the children are gone, when they're done educational responsibilities, but they still have a working career, but have not gone into hunker down retirement mode, is a good time for talking about things, where they feel like they can do something and haven't kind of put it away yet.
We start marketing to folks when they are in their 50s. And depending on, obviously we're going to run a list and we have a budget. And if we can't send to as many people as populate that list, then we start playing with our criteria. But I think your question was also related to people we're having conversations with. So, who I market to isn't going to be the same as who I'm going to spend time with and who I'm likely to bring up the subject with. So I'd say I'd probably skew a little older with regard to personal attention, probably 60 or older.
So we have to remember that doing some of these things you have to get beyond the inertia there. You have to go see an attorney to make a will. You have to go get the paperwork at the bank or at your HR office. And that, is, I think, something that people plan a little earlier than when they actually get in the thick of it, when they're staring down retirement.
I do training for our major gift staff and our annual fund staff. And what I tell them is it's much less about soliciting, much more about managing a relationship and being there and constantly being in that mode, asking through our publications, through our direct mail, through our thank you calls, through our visits, because it's on the donor's timetable, which is exactly what you're saying. And they're not going to write their will or revise their will until there's a life event that triggers that, or they finally get up the gumption to do it for the first time. So you want to be top of mind when that happens. You want the donor to know that, yes, you received bequests, that you're going to be here 30 years from now. And it's that consistency over the long haul that's really going to yield success in a planned giving program.
Small nonprofits, particularly those who are relatively new, have a real hard time with this, right? Because people are saying, well, are you going to be here or not? And that's when having a relationship with your local community foundation is huge, because they can be that backstop, or they can even, take a more active role in things for you, where you can assure the donor that, yeah, something will be here, even if we're not, if they have that doubt.
For those who are newer to planned giving or just getting into planned giving, how do we make that conversation with donors a little easier? So when I say easier, I'm really talking about, you're talking about somebody's death. And for fundraisers, that gets awkward sometimes.
Well, you have to have emotional intelligence. And I think that's really key to anybody in this work, is to have some empathy and some perception. And that people are going to see you very differently than you see yourself. I mean, you might say that you're the bridge between them wanting to help and the mission you serve, but they might see you as the reaper, somebody who's coming in to take from them as opposed to help them.
I would jump in as somebody who's been in healthcare fundraising and dealing with, those issues a lot more. I'm a little bit more kind of unapologetic at our industry for having those thoughts, because we're basically representing an organization. We may not be comfortable picking up the phone and calling people, but we do. This is just a tactic, and it's a tactic that our donors find useful and important. So I think we need to put aside our concerns, get ourselves comfortable with these plans, and realize that these aren't uncomfortable to the donors. These are very profound to the donors. And if we're not acting on it because of our own hesitations, and that's kind of deals with any part of our career that we need to get better at.
But some people are just simply fearful of the whole process. And that's where that emotional intelligence thing comes in.
Right.
Hi, this is Curtis Schmidt, producer of the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange, jumping in for a moment. If you're a nonprofit professional who has questions about your program, or maybe you feel like you've taken your advocacy, fundraising, or membership effort as far as you can and you need some fresh ideas, then we have a special offer for you today. NPFX podcast listeners can get a free 30-minute consultation with IPM Advancement, no strings attached, when you go to ipmadvancement.com/free. Just enter a few details, and an IPM team member will contact you to follow up. It's that easy. That website again is ipmadvancement.com/free. Thanks for listening, and we hope to talk to you soon. Now let's return to the episode.
So what are some of the common mistakes that you have seen in your experience when it comes to plan giving? Common mistakes that fundraisers may make?
One of the biggest mistakes is ignoring annual fund donors. And we've already stated that point, that you are just as likely to get a bequest from an annual fund donor as you are from a major gift donor. But people who don't understand plan giving may not realize that. So I think that's a really big mistake. Also, one of the mistakes, and this is just one really, it's personal to me, and that is not celebrating a planned gift when you're informed of it. And that's obvious. You're not going to be able to celebrate it when the gift is received. It's also a really great way to encourage other people to include your organization in their estate plans by telling their story in your newsletter and in your other mailings. So I think not sharing those stories and not celebrating those gifts is really to your detriment.
For me, it's focusing on techniques over relationships. I've seen over time where folks will say, push the method and not the connection with the people to make sure what they're doing is good for them first.
Mm-hmm.
I would add, one of the things that we can all do is do our own estate plan and get a basic knowledge of how that works and put ourselves in the space of the people we're talking to and realizing, what their thoughts are and what the tools are just for a basic bequest. I wanted to also add something that I use all the time to quickly describe to people what plan giving is, but really what is the field of play? You imagine that you have 100 feet of retail space, and that retail space equals everything that people own: homes, vacation homes, retirement assets, non-retirement assets, private companies, anything that they own, and then obviously cash. You have people lining up at about 3 to 5 feet of that 100 feet. And that's basically what people own as cash. And we're all fighting for the most limited resource that donors have. And my pet peeve as a former plan giving and major gift officer is there's really good current gifts on that other 97 to 95 feet. And we, as development professionals, need to learn at least a little bit about how those work and how they could benefit us in meeting our goals, because they're much easier gifts for donors and they don't necessarily fall in the plan giving space.
Alan, that's a really great point. I had a couple of colleagues who were really resistant to what Dr. James refers to, Russell James refers to as non-cash assets. Mm-hmm. And I remember there was this one presentation where I sat our department head down and our major gift officers. And I'm like, look, every time somebody sends you a check for $10,000 and you go ahead and cash it, this is what the donors missing out on. So I know people are afraid to talk about taxes. They might be afraid to talk about gifts of stock. Hopefully at this point, everybody is talking about qualified charitable distributions from IRAs. But that webinar really helps people who are not that well acquainted with plan giving and non-cash assets as to why they should be asking from the bigger bucket instead of the smaller bucket.
Yeah.
I've always thought that a planned gift or planned giving program is a good way to build an endowment. True?
I would say true, but every nonprofit board is different, and every nonprofit, they're made up with people that may or may not be receptive to that. I have implemented with clients a windfall policy where they're willing to do it that would produce endowment or board restricted endowment, which is a little more flexible. But that has had some interesting conversations at many boards. So in theory, I think that's great, but it's not every organization that's gonna see that. But yes, they would be a great way to do it.
I agree with Alan on this. I really think it depends on the organization. Endowments are a really long-term commitment. It's forever. And so you're committing that organization to having the expertise to manage and invest that endowment and to spend it according to the donor's wishes. To have access to the will or the other document that may have restricted that gift. And it's a really big commitment. So I'm going to give a plug also for community foundations when it comes to endowment. I think that if you are not 100% sure that you're going to be able to steward this gift for the next 50 years, then that's probably a more viable option for that nonprofit.
I'm glad you brought community foundations into the conversation. So that helps this transition into donor advised funds. Where do donor advised funds play into the scenario?
Yeah, I would say with regard to donor advised funds, they're not a planned gift. It's another bucket to choose from in terms of assets that a donor can give. But depending on the size of your organization, as a planned giving officer, you may be the most knowledgeable about donor advised funds and therefore a resource to the rest of the team and may be the one that's handling them. How you can use it in planned giving is, I think it's a really easy way to introduce a planned giving conversation with a donor who you know has a donor advised fund. Money's already been given away. They've already gotten their tax deduction. And there's going to be a remainder of that donor advised fund when they pass away. So why not ask for it? Again, community foundations were the reason that donor advised funds were started. And they do a great job of helping donors think through decisions when it is set up, when the donor advised fund is set up. And one of those decisions is deciding what the remainder will be used for. It could be something within the community foundation. It could be something out in the community, a favorite charity. That's not as true for the commercial sponsored funds, the big investment firms that have these national donor advised funds. And not going to get into this because you guys did a great podcast on donor advised funds, and I would encourage your listeners to check that one out. But you can use it, as a marketing idea. So if you know a donor has a donor advised fund, market to them and specifically ask them to be named as the remainder beneficiary. Or if you're out visiting a donor or talking to them on the phone and you know they have a donor advised fund, ask them what they're going to do with that remainder. The commercial funds, as I said, they might not be as clear about the options, and making sure that your donor has designated a charity. And if they don't, then that donor advised fund gets to hold on to that remainder and use it as they see fit to support charitable work. So I think it's a great conversation starter.
And I think it's a good indicator. If somebody has a donor advised fund, they are obviously at a different level of sophistication in terms of handling their wealth, and they might be open to other things beyond just a charitable gift through their estate, through their will. And so it could be a good opening to say, what else can we talk about here? Because they've taken that step.
So let's talk about the donor's perspective. And as a fundraiser, how do you want to position your planned giving program to donors?
Well, we want to make it accessible and easy. We don't want to scare donors off, and we want to normalize it. And that's another tip that I've picked up from Russell James is people like me leave bequests to organizations like this one. And so to the extent that you share a donor story and another donor identifies with them in some way, having a similar experience at our nonprofit or anything else, they see themselves in that same role, and it encourages them to start considering a planned gift.
So you're saying that there's a storytelling element that comes into play?
Yeah, a really big one. And they're really great stories because planned giving donors are probably your biggest fans. I mean, they've elevated you to the status of their family because that's who you include in your will, is your family. And they're treating your nonprofit the same way. So they're probably going to have a really terrific story about why they support your organization and why they established a bequest. And that's the story you want to share in your marketing materials. I've met some families where you talk about true grace, just listening to people, and the fact that they invite us into their homes and they share these stories with us is it's such a privilege.
That's a wonderful way to put it.
Go ahead, Matt.
I don't want to call it a pet peeve, but I think something that we could do differently is how the stories are told. A lot of the copy I see for planned giving stories, which is good. I mean, but it's thick, and I think it tends to be written, in my mind, for the generation before, not necessarily the boomers who are maturing into things, because any of us, and baby boomers included, are reading more headlines and trying to grasp information more quickly. And so taking more of an annual fund look at how you write is important, as opposed to trying to tell long stories with big paragraph blocks. I mean, which is good. And that story serves two purposes. It's good for the people reading it, but it's also good stewardship for the person you're writing about.
Man, I think you can use like two versions of the story. So like we'll use a really short one on, say, a postcard or a direct mail piece, but then we'll tell the longer story on our website, and then we'll promote that through the email, promote it through social media. And that way, if someone's interested, they're clicking on it, they're going there. You can take a little more time with that story on the website.
Yeah, we always like to refer to that content as diggable content. So you get people interested, you get them into the funnel, and then let them choose their own adventure as they get deeper and deeper.
So what specific advice would you all have for small to mid-sized nonprofits who are creating a planned giving program from scratch?
Basically, get out and see people and talk to them. We used to joke about this at a place I work, where sometimes the planned giving officer, and of course, Jeannette is not like this, was like, oh, want to gift annuity with that? They were order takers and they weren't getting out. And the idea is to get out and see people so that they know you build relationships, and they're comfortable with being able to talk about these things, which may not be comfortable for them to start.
I would say for a small nonprofit, rather than thinking about your planned giving program as a standalone program, think about how you can piggyback on other things you're already doing. So whether that's marketing and soliciting by adding, a checkoff box on your direct mail reply device saying, yes, I've already included Good Shepherd in my will, or yes, I'd like information on how to include Good Shepherd in my will. We've done that. Stories that we tell about donors who've done it, they go in our general donor publications, our magazine. And, on the stewardship side, our Legacy Society members are invited to everything. So we do have one standalone event that's intimate, it's small, it's with the president, but they get invited to absolutely everything, especially things that are stewardship oriented and not like your fundraising gala and things like that. We're not asking our planned giving donors necessarily, we're trying to steward them.
That's an excellent point too, is to have a legacy society. Mm-hmm. That's huge.
The other thing I'd say for small nonprofits is consistency. Just like we were talking about the long haul on endowment, and if you're not prepared to steward and invest and correctly manage an endowment, not starting one is probably a better bet than going to a community foundation. Well, same thing with Legacy Society. Once you start inviting people to that annual lunch with the president, you have to keep doing it, because if you have a change in staff and you don't do it one year, well, the donors are left wondering, do they think that my gift isn't important anymore? And they won't understand, and they won't reach out and ask you why you're not having it. So for example, last year during COVID, and the year before, was it the year before? I've lost total track of time. I have to be honest.
I think we all have.
I'll just say the years. In 2020 and 2021, we did not have our luncheon. And both years we sent a letter and we said, we're not having the luncheon. We are going to have a Zoom meet and greet the CEO and those who could and wanted to participated. So consistency, and a long-term commitment to stewarding these donors for the rest of their life.
And one other thing that often gets overlooked is the bequest administration side. I think all too often nonprofits just sit back and let the money come in. And I'll say, having worked at the American Cancer Society, having 100 plus open estates at any given time, back in the day when that was not something managed by their national office, there was a lot of shrinkage in estates. I think as nonprofits, we think lucky us, we should just sit back and get what we get. I have a different opinion. I think if the donors put you in their estate plan, they did that on purpose. And if you let other things get in the way of what their intentions were, shame on you. I think you need to be proactive in the process, understand the process, and engage with the people managing the process to make sure that they know that you're paying attention and that you expect what that donor had intended to get to you.
Or partner with a really great estate planning attorney in your area, maybe even somebody on your board if you're a small nonprofit and you don't have the knowledge to do that.
That kind of leads into my next question. For the young or inexperienced development director or executive director who wants to learn more about plan giving and increase their expertise, there's a ton of resources out there. It can be overwhelming. What are your favorite go-tos? What do you recommend?
I attend the Plan Giving Roundtable, been a president and been involved with them for many, many years. It's local for most people. I mean, this is a national podcast, so maybe not terribly convenient everywhere, but in major markets, that's a good source. I was fortunate enough to go to William and Mary and participate in a month-long, spread out over 2 years course. Those are out there, and those are also online now, so they're a lot easier, a lot more affordable.
I'd recommend becoming a member of the National Association of Charitable Gift Planners, and hopefully there's a local chapter in your area. I think they have fantastic resources, and of course you'll get to meet people who are really involved in plan giving, and they can mentor you. I've also, more for a networking opportunity, been very involved in my local estate planning council. I serve on the board, and it's less about education for me because I don't have that foundation of a law degree or a CFP after my name. But the networking and the relationships I've built have just been tremendous for me personally, as well as my organization.
Thank you. Matt?
Yeah, besides the kind of traditional how to do it things, I think it's really important that the plan giving people, new or established, get into the heads, you might say, of the people they work with, their donors. And look at books like, back in the day, there was the Millionaire Next Door series. There's a great book, if anybody knows Henry Nouwen, called The Spirituality of Fundraising, that are ways of getting yourself to look at the world from your donor's point of view so that you're able to connect with them better on what their concerns are first, and then how you can help them out with helping your organization.
So let's talk about takeaways from this episode. What would you like our listeners to take away regarding plan giving?
Well, I think Jeannette brought up an excellent point, which is get an advisor. Nobody can buy the relationships that you have with your donors, but you can buy the expertise to help you finish and to conclude that relationship. So build a relationship and don't be afraid of connecting with people. And then, phone a friend who is an expert and get them involved to finish things up.
Alan, what do you think?
I would add, from a career development standpoint, I got into plan giving back in the day when it was still really out there as a niche. I was just fortunate enough to work at an organization that was a machine, which is the American Cancer Society. But I think it changed the dynamics of my career. It taught me how to do relationship fundraising, and from there I've moved into principal gift officer, and those are some of the best, highest paying jobs in our industry. So if you can master that or even be halfway decent at it, there's a lot of good jobs out there that you can get into as a fundraiser and kind of move away from the annual, event side.
And Jeannette, what do you think?
I think keep it simple. And don't be afraid. It's no wonder people are afraid to talk about plan giving, because people think it's about death and taxes, but it's really about relationships. And if you're already good at building donor relationships, then you have the foundation to be good at plan giving. And remember that everyone who loves your mission, whether they give to you or not, if they love your mission, they are all plan giving prospects. And lastly, ask in the mail, ask on the phone, ask in person, and ask on Zoom.
This has been a terrific. Do you have one back
I'm
off?
sorry.
Go ahead, Matt.
Kind of a fun fact. The Myers-Briggs assessment actually has a plan giving officer. I think it's for INFJs and ENFJs. It's kind of fascinating. I really fell down when I saw that.
Interesting. Well, if you're a fundraiser and you're looking at your career track with this transfer of wealth, with this opportunity for more and more planned gifts, it's certainly something to think about, especially if you're in annual giving like me. I was in the trenches for years and years and years, and it's burnout city. And to start to move into relationship-based fundraising is an important career move for a lot of fundraisers. And so it's an important thing to think about.
This has been a terrific conversation, and I want to give you a chance to plug yourselves and your institutions. So where can we find out more about you, Jeannette Edwards?
Sure. People can go to our website, which is goodshepherdrehab.org. I also have a Plan Giving website, goodshepherdrehab.org/plangiving. And they can look at all the materials that we have there, and they can also reach out to me personally.
Thank you. Matt Hugg.
Yes, please go to nonprofit.courses, not .org or .com, .courses. You'll find more than 6,000 videos, podcasts like this, and other great resources. Most of it's free and it's all open access. So check it out and go to the contact page. That'll go right to my mailbox.
Thank you. And I think IPM Advancement might have some content on there as well.
Yes, you do. Yes, thank you.
My good friend, Alan Knobloch.
Go to IPM and ask for information on plan giving or help on plan giving. And I would hope they would reach out to me as their content expert around that.
Absolutely.
I think that's why I'm here.
Folks, thank you so much for your time today, and thanks for a wonderful discussion. And Russ?
Yes.
Number 2 is in the bag.
It's in the bag, and it was a good one, Rich. I think we had a great discussion. I learned a lot, and this is a wonderful topic, and it's a very timely topic to be discussing, and thanks for everybody's time.
This has been the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. We'll see you next time.
That concludes this episode of the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. Thanks to our panel for sharing their insights and expertise. If you'd like to learn more about our panel members or any of the organizations or resources featured in this episode, we will include links in the show notes. If you like this podcast, we would love your help spreading the word. First, please subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app so you always know when a new episode is released. Second, forward the episodes you like to friends and colleagues or share them on social media. Word of mouth is one of the best ways you can help us reach more nonprofit professionals like yourself. And if you use Apple Podcasts or Audible, please leave us a review. Positive reviews are how many listeners decide whether or not to try out a new podcast. We appreciate your help. For suggestions on topics, guests, or nonprofit organizations you'd like to hear on the podcast, send an email with the subject heading NPFX suggestion to contact@ipmadvancement.com. For back episodes and more resources like white papers, infographics, and blog articles, please visit the free IPM Advancement Nonprofit Resource Library at ipmadvancement.com/resources. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.